Greetings, I wish everyone good health.
Roman Lvovich, what's happening? A special operation by the SBU, a strike on Russia's nuclear aviation. We attacked more than 5 aircraft. Tell us more about this.
The security service, they have a special center there that deals with long-range strategic drones. They attacked Saki. I see we've talked about Saki with you several times already. It was said that near Novofedorivka there is the main depot supporting Russia's naval aviation, but the aircraft themselves are stationed specifically at Saki. This is a naval aviation airfield. Naturally, there are Su-24s, Su-30s, and some helicopters, which, by the way, were supposed to intercept these drones but failed to do so. As Army aviation sometimes reports, the commander couldn't do it for Putin. That's the kind of bad luck that happened. 5 aircraft were hit, 1 destroyed. One of the 5 was destroyed, a Su-30 completely. Another Su-30 was damaged, and 3 Su-24s were also damaged. They really can be carriers of nuclear weapons, among other things.
The SBU struck 5 fighter jets at the Saki airfield. A Su-30 SM was destroyed and another one was damaged. 3 Su-24s were destroyed, aircraft capable of carrying nuclear warheads. An aviation munitions depot was blown up, and Saki is Russia's key airbase on the Black Sea. It has been put out of action. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's nuclear threats and 2 nuclear submarines that are approaching Russia, or have already approached, is the fact that we are once again attacking nuclear-capable aircraft in occupied Crimea significant? Is this an important signal when taken together?
Su-30, Su-24, even a frontline bomber, that's tactical aviation, but nevertheless, it can carry nuclear weapons. So if that's the case, then this is a kind of parallel strike. A parallel strike along with, at the very least, informational pressure on Russia from the United States. Why informational? Because, for example, in the information flow, giving the order to 2 submarines to head toward the Russian coast, in reality, that doesn't really mean much. Why? Because, first of all, some submarines are already near the Russian coast anyway, and submarines, they're like gophers, you can't see them, but they're there. And when, for example, Trump announces that 2 submarines are heading somewhere, they're actually not there anymore. In other words, they're already in position, already prepared. It's a way to apply pressure to prompt certain decisions and also an attempt to rein in Medvedev's rhetoric. Lately, he's been having some issues with his tongue. It's gotten a bit too long. He probably needs a canning machine or a lip sealing machine or maybe even a tongue rolling machine. Or just cut it off right to the root. So most likely Trump is trying to do this to pressure Putin into trimming Medvedev's tongue a little. Because joking about nukes, the way Medvedev did, joked, in quotes, is absolutely unacceptable, especially when it comes to the Americans in this regard. They have a pretty serious number of nuclear warheads, about 5,500, and that's just the ones that are publicly known, and delivery systems, including submarines, there are plenty of missiles there. A salvo from just 2 of those submarines that Trump mentioned would be enough for Russia to be forgotten for about 30 years. Well, actually, that's not a bad idea, by the way.
Is the attack on the Saki base a tactical or strategic failure for Russia? What does this mean for us? So in this way, we are demonstrating strength, preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula, because it's been a long time since we powerfully attacked airfields in Crimea, and there haven't been such serious losses. What do you think?
They tried to get through. Well, there were a few strikes on the airfields, actually. There were several hits here. We remember the strike on Engels as well. That was pretty good. The SBU did its job. When they gather a sufficient number of drones, it can take them a long time to collect them. So then they receive specific targeting instructions and carry out the tasks quite well, like they did this time. Saki is located in Crimea. That's Western Crimea. Basically, it's southwestern Crimea. So basically for us, this is, from a targeting perspective, it's a good target and in principle an easy one. Why? Because approaching from the sea allows you to take out a large number of military facilities. So the question you asked is a good one. Why didn't it happen before? Why didn't it happen earlier? So let's not get too excited yet, so we won't be disappointed later, but if there is a systematic campaign against the Crimean airfields, there are 5 of them that the Russians use. Believe me, at least 15 to 20% of Russia's tactical and army aviation, including helicopters stationed there, would be taken out. Well, we'll see. We'll keep asking Malyuk for an encore every day so that he keeps repeating it over and over.
Roman Grigorievich, a 40-kilometer traffic jam on the Kirk, or rather the Crimean Bridge. What does that indicate? As I understand it, there are manual inspections taking up to 7 hours, according to Krimsky Vetter. Russia is simply in some kind of logistical dead end.
Let me clarify a bit, if you don't mind. The Crimean Bridge is located in Moscow. If their traffic jam stretches from Moscow to the Kerch Bridge, believe me, that's not a 7-hour jam. That's a 777-hour traffic jam. And it's still a big question whether they'll even make it through. And the Kerch Bridge, which at this moment, well, first of all, it's not exactly closed, but right now there is very strict control over entry and exit. And now they're trying to get in. Russians are desperately trying to somehow get there after the recent lockdown, following the extensive destruction of some crucial aviation fuel storage facilities. Some individuals are attempting to travel on foot while others are going by car, all of them diligently trying to reach the Crimean Peninsula. Naturally, this is causing traffic jams, and I understand that the traffic jam won't clear up until September. It will just keep building up. They have no other options. Well, there is another option to ride a helmet to the Aral Sea if it hasn't completely dried up yet.
That's already a cartoon. Please like this video, write a few kind words to our duo in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from. And what do you think about how Ukraine's armed forces and other special services are the first to attack military targets in Crimea, facilities, airfields, the enemy's aviation? Let's move on to block number 2. Strikes on logistics and infrastructure. A strike on the Frolova railway junction. The Arkita station is on fire. What's happening with the railway junctions and logistics? I checked. Voronezh, Rostov region, Moscow suburbs. We are attacking railway junctions, military trains. They're burning, fuel tanks are on fire. Roman Grigorievich, the floor is yours.
Right now, there are mainly 2 railway junctions that are very important to us. Stop them, at the very least, or at least slow them down. These are the Volgograd and Rostov junctions. And over the past 2 weeks, our defense forces' long-range strike capabilities have been hitting exactly these 2 junctions. This is the right move because most of the fuel goes through them. Fuel goes through the Volgograd junction, and ammunition comes from Tatarstan as well as equipment from the Urals. Then several supply chains converge at the Rostov railway junction. There, the flows are redistributed, either to Melitopol or to Tokmak, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Donetsk, Volnovakha, or Luhansk, among others. All of this goes through Rostov. This is very important for us. Now, the second wave, which has already begun, the second wave of the Russian summer offensive needs to be stopped deep in the rear, and disabling those same traction substations, thermal power plants, balancing capacities, taking out high voltage power lines that supply the railway. This is very important for us. Why? Because even if there's a delay of just a few hours, the entire supply schedule gets disrupted. There are certain factors involved with loading, unloading, and moving onto certain tracks, for example. Let's say onto some tracks. And all of this gets disrupted for the Russians. We can use long-range strikes, but they absolutely need to be scaled up and carried out systematically, just like the strikes on oil refineries and airfields. And then, in principle, it's possible to delay the advance of Russian troops by at least 30%.
Oil depots in Sochi have been hit. The airport is not operating at full capacity. Rosneft massive explosions. Roman Nikolaevich, we're now starting to gradually attack both oil depots and refineries in remote regions. To what extent is this a systematic strategy at the moment for destabilizing the supply across all of Russia?
Well, right now, this systematic approach is visible. The main thing is not to abandon it. This has happened so many times already. Last year, our GUR and the security services drone forces started destroying the Russian oil industry. And then, as if by magic, in May, it all stopped. This year, too, the destruction began at the start of the year. And by March, they had picked up quite a good pace. Then it stopped. So now, in principle, we could maintain the same pace. If we don't slow down, and if, as you rightly said, there is a systematic approach, then by the end of the year, at least a third or even half of the Russian oil industry could be taken out. Our long-range strike capabilities can, in principle, easily shut down all Russian oil refineries, plus oil terminals, and even the Druzhba pipeline, which passes 40 kilometers north of Semenovka. So we have this capability. The main thing is that it isn't stopped now. The strike on Sochi, there have already been several strikes on this base. Why are strikes being carried out specifically on this base? Well, it's kind of a base, but actually it's the fuel and lubricants depot of the Sochi airfield. There's a large amount of aviation kerosene there, which is also used to refuel Russian army aviation. These are the helicopters that intercept our drones. For us, this is straightforward. It's a military facility. The fact that they have military aircraft stationed at a civilian airfield is their problem, frankly speaking. For us, it's a military target because as soon as the opportunity arises, that aviation kerosene gets taken out. Although in reality, it could be taken out even at the refinery. After all, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere from the fourth dimension in their tanks. Now they've set a storage tank on fire. 2000. So this is a significant fuel storage tank. It takes several months just to restore one tank. And if more burn down, which is likely since there are several at least, then that's even worse. So if the strikes don't stop, I'll say it again. By the end of the year, the Russians will have a major fuel problem.
A strike on a gas distribution station in Kurgan, gas pipelines in Siberia, in the Moscow region, and those heading towards Central Asia are under attack. These are people who care. Who is doing this, Roman Igoric, and how important are these strikes on the energy sector today, especially on gas? And again, can these strikes destabilize the supply to all of central Russia right now?
Well, judging by the geography and the number of gas distribution stations destroyed recently, and these gas distribution stations are being destroyed because they are located near military facilities, meaning they supply or serve military facilities. Our people who care are definitely behind this. It's clearly their work. Because essentially you could burn down a gas distribution station with just a match. And this stops an entire production cycle if it's a military or industrial facility, or it disrupts certain vital functions of a military facility if it's a non-industrial military site, but still it's military. That's why, of course, we will support such actions. And a big thank you to those who cared enough not to spare a match. Just one, to help ease the burden on the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people by stopping the Russian hydrocarbon industry. That's not a bad move if we're talking about gas distribution stations. But as for entire gas transit routes like the Turkmen gas you're talking about now, those are main gas pipelines and stopping them is a more complicated operation. Nevertheless, it's possible. I think our concerned citizens who understand these things very well are up to the task. These are local residents, after all. Well, this is from Turkmenistan through Kazakhstan. It's quite a large, long pipeline. And in principle, any local resident could stop an entire main gas pipeline there. And that's why they're so concerned. You could practically say they're our second army. And there are already at least hundreds, if not thousands, of these concerned citizens.
Roman Nikolaevich, over the past 2 weeks, we've attacked the Leningrad region 3 times already. What is the target of these attacks? Because once again, the Pulkovo airport was out of operation and it was down for quite a long time. There was a cover plan and drone attacks. Previously, we didn't really attack the Leningrad region. Previously, it was mostly in the Moscow region. If we're talking about major key cities in Russia, that's St. Petersburg and Moscow. And now, especially after the so-called celebration of the Russian Navy Day on Sunday when it took place, we've started actively attacking the Leningrad region.
Well, it's 1,000 kilometers. The thing is, that's quite a significant distance. My fierce ones like the same Bobry might simply not make it that far. So you need to send pretty serious devices there, almost at the level of an airplane. But nevertheless, as I understand it, we do have them, not in large numbers, admittedly, but we have them, and there are targets to go after there. First, the service begins. This is a specific terminal for transferring the same fuel of various types, both gas and oil. And ending with Lenin and Murmansk, that is, if we're talking about that direction, at least to the north. So there are enough military facilities there for our long-range units to reach. But these are already strategic drones, heavy drones, well, from the point of view of the general classification of drones. heavy strategic drones for which 1,000 kilometers is not a long distance at all.
When we talk with you, we have also prepared another segment about the panic in Russia's rear. First of all, without a doubt, there are flight delays all over Russia, an aviation collapse that is costing Russia hundreds of millions of dollars. The FSB is jamming communications. A very important point is that regional governors are coming out and saying, Russians, please bear with us for a while. We'll be without communication, without internet. I read that this has already happened in 5 regions. 5 governors have made such statements. The FSB is holding meetings. Putin is summoning the Minister of Transport for a dressing down because logistics are being disrupted. Again, there are 30-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean bridge, inspections lasting up to 7 hours, and not just there. Flight delays, chaos in Tula is growing, and panic is spreading among civilians. In your opinion, can we call this a managed crisis in the Tula region of the Russian Federation, and how long can Russia withstand this pace of chaos?
Well, it's hardly being managed, exactly. That is, it's an attempt to create chaos, and then how to manage that chaos, Russians will figure it out themselves, because in some areas they have competent leaders, and in others they have completely clueless ones who sometimes even end up jumping out the window, shouting and swearing, "Why did you throw me out?" But nevertheless, everyone saw this perfectly well, and we understand how it works. Russian special services handle these kinds of issues. This chaos, which in the end, at the very least, hits Russia's economy, because any, let's say, air transportation or rail transportation operates on a certain schedule. If the schedule is disrupted somewhere along the line, it practically shuts down the entire profit-making mechanism along the whole chain, or at the very least, it even leads to losses as such. So this may not be our direct action. It's specifically indirect. But this is a side reaction, a side effect that comes from the use of our military drones against Russian military targets. And at the same time, naturally, Russian transportation mechanisms of any kind are disrupted for various reasons, one of which, at least presumably, is the infliction of damage. So let it be, in principle, if it wobbles, eventually it will wobble enough and collapse. After all, the Russian Empire, the Russian Federation, at the moment, it's a colossus with feet of clay. Feet of clay? For Russia, that's its economy. And as soon as the economy is undermined, it will collapse. This colossus will crumble, just as the Soviet Union once crumbled, for the very same reason, for economic reasons. So the more chaos there is, even uncontrolled chaos, so be it. The main thing is that it leads to the collapse of the Russian Empire.
Roman Igorovich, the USA, Trump, and nuclear signals. So once again, we definitely need to discuss this with you. Donald Trump stated that the US nuclear submarines are ready, and in general, he is prepared for nuclear war. This is a very serious statement. I don't know how much of it is just talk, because when Donald Trump makes such statements that the US is ready for nuclear war, what consequences should we expect from these words? Peskov responds, in a nuclear war, there are no winners. The Kremlin abruptly shifted its tone from threats to justifications. And here's the question, is this a political game or is it a real signal from the US? What should we be preparing for? And why did Moscow change its rhetoric?
Well, the thing is, Medvedev went too far. We've already talked about this before. Medvedev went overboard, provoking Trump in this regard, and Trump got fed up. He's so impulsive, after all. And in the morning, most likely, he got up on the wrong side of the bed and naturally started swinging his saber. He sent 2 submarines to the Russian shores, though no one told him that they were already off the Russian coast. They just said, all right, let's go. They went to carry out a combat mission. After all, this is one of the main branches of the American nuclear triad. The submarines. Naturally, just the movement itself in that direction puts pressure on Russia. It's clear that Medvedev has now been pushed under the baseboard somewhere. He won't be barking for a while. But this topic definitely needs to be played out. That's why Peskov and maybe even Putin had to squirm a bit, but mainly Peskov. Now, most likely that tired old horse will have to come out on stage. He'll also put in his 2 cents there. I mean, Lavrov. So they'll play it out. They'll calm Trump down regarding actions against Medvedev. Medvedev probably won't be brought up anymore in connection with nukes. Or he won't, or at least they'll explain to him that he shouldn't do that.
And in your considered professional opinion, how much of a truly significant deterrent is the United States Navy in the present day?
Well, the US does have the largest Navy, of course, and there are certain problems right now, real problems. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be restructured in some areas. Why? Because everyone now clearly understands that drones, not just aerial, but also underwater and surface drones, are a major problem for any navy at all. And now this problem will be faced by all the navies of the world. And those who don't have a navy will be rubbing their hands, realizing that it turns out it was the right decision not to invest, as they say. Once upon a time, does anyone remember Riken when he had such an interesting reprise about dinosaurs? He once said, "Where are these dinosaurs? Where are these six-story fools? They disappeared all this time, but Klopik survived." So here we have the same picture now. Now all these six-story fools, meaning the same fleet, are a very good target for small strike weapons of various types and very cheap ones at that. That's why they either need to be, for example, completely rebuilt, meaning carrier groups need to be reinforced with certain mechanisms, or for instance, hidden, just like the Russian Black Sea Fleet is doing now. They simply hid themselves, started behaving like those dinosaurs, like little bugs crawling under the baseboards in Novorossiysk, and now they're just sitting there quietly. Rarely, when they do come out, it's mostly the submarines that try to take a shot. With 4-caliber missiles, that's it. So that's the kind of mechanism we're talking about. And now the United States, having, of course, a very powerful navy, will have to think about what to do with it. The only way to use the fleet is as a carrier fleet. We're talking about aircraft carriers, which on the one hand can now be seriously protected even just by distance, and they can provide the opportunity for planes or missiles to take off and carry out their combat missions. But that's strategy. Now the Pentagon will restructure things.
Roman Egorovich, there's a very interesting thought here. It appeared in the text, information surfaced in the information space that this tsunami in Kamchatka and then the volcanic eruption in Kamchatka, well, at first the tsunami was actually a test. Some believe these were unsuccessful Russian tests, while others say it was the Americans conducting tests. And accordingly, as a result, the tsunami in Kamchatka, moreover, information emerged that appear or something more than appear at the Russian Federation's nuclear submarine bases was damaged. As a military analyst, how would you assess this information? How likely is it to be true?
Well, it's unlikely to be external interference. Well, unlikely. Why? Because first of all, Kamchatka is a fault line, or rather not exactly a fault, but an overthrust. It's a serious seismic zone. You'd have to be completely brainless to build submarine bases there with nuclear weapons. Well, the Russians went a bit overboard with that. Not there, but somewhere else, just not there. Then there are serious earthquakes, of course, and tsunamis are one of the consequences of earthquakes as well as volcanic eruptions. So that's the general picture, and any external interference with seismic centers, it's already been mapped out. That's precisely why it's highly unlikely to be any external pressure whatsoever of any conceivable kind. But as for the very same office, I mean specifically the sacred office of God himself, it could have intervened, could have stepped in and humbled the Russians a bit, because there is too much suffering. Lately, there have been too many curses upon Russian heads. And in the end, yes, the Heavenly Office records all of this, and then a decision is made and the plate is shifted, so to speak. It's unlikely that the Americans can get involved there.
Roman Lvovich, I've prepared an important topic for the finale, the new command of the Air Force and the Armed Forces of Ukraine. President Zelensky has appointed Anatoly Krivonoshko as the new commander of the Ukrainian Air Force. Before this, he spent a year performing duties to strengthen the air component, especially air defense and drones. What do you think this appointment will change? Is this already before Yura? Can we expect a tougher approach in the skies?
Well, the appointment, he's been in the role for a year already. First of all, the right decision was made a year ago. For about a year before this appointment, we kept saying that it was absolutely necessary to appoint a pilot as the head of the Air Force, that is, as the commander-in-chief. So they listened. Yes, they listened, though only after we lost our heroic pilot in the 16th. They listened and replaced him, once again appointing someone as acting commander. So for a year, they observed how a pilot could handle the air defense system, and then a decision was made. Indeed, pilots are managing well, especially now as the air component is becoming the main focus, even within the air defense system. Not to mention certain offensive aspects, so naturally, after the decision was made, there was a real appointment. The pilot was appointed as the commander-in-chief. Now, the question is about the next steps. In other words, simply replacing the commander with a pilot, or rather appointing a pilot as commander-in-chief, is not enough. We need to restructure our entire Air Force system to fit the aviation mission. That is, all heads of air defense commands, all heads along the management vertical, at least as far as the air forces are concerned, should be pilots. This is very important. Therefore, at the moment, this is only half the job. Right now, it's only half the job. We need to see this through to the end and replace the entire chain of command in the air forces with flight personnel. Only then can we say that our air forces will not only be a serious defensive mechanism, but also a formidable offensive force, which is what they should be. Because it is precisely the air component that is the main paradigm in the third millennium for carrying out offensive operations.
Roman Grigorievich, should we expect our allies to transfer them? All of them, JASSM missiles, Taurus missiles, other missiles, Tomahawks, of course, eventually.
Well, Tomahawks probably in due course. After all, it's about the launch platforms. Only the Typhoons can be used by us. Although a few Tomahawks could be used purely for the Ostrovsky, nothing more. But I repeat once again, we don't have the means to launch them. It's either submarines, torpedo tubes, or vertical launchers on submarines, Mk-45. There are such silos launch systems, or a ship-based launcher, Mk-41, which has 64 silos. But to use it from a ship, well, it's unlikely anyone would give us a ship and, for example, to bury it here like they did in concrete. In Romania and in Poland, that's too lengthy a process just to launch Tomahawks. So only one mechanism remains, the Typhoon or Typhoon launchers, as they're also called, depending on the translation. So about the Typhoon launchers. First of all, there are a lot of them, and theoretically, purely theoretically, they could even give us Tomahawks. But again, I repeat, that would be purely for show, to scare. Here, there's more hope for our own ballistic missiles. We can produce them. The question is for the authorities. Where have they been for the past 7 years? But let's say when it comes to the JASSMs and the Taurus missiles, there is definitely more hope here. Because on their own, the F-16s are carriers of cruise missiles, and at this stage, at least given the realities of the enemy's strong air defense and the sufficient number of SAM systems and aircraft, the optimal use of the F-16 is precisely as a launch platform for the JASSMs. JASSM missiles have a range from 370 to 980 kilometers. So, again, logic suggests that we should be getting them. Therefore, all we can do is wait for them, at least for now. We'll see how things go with Trump, depending on his mood. When it comes to the JSM issue, Trump must make the decision, or he will if it comes to that. And then there's the question of the Taurus missiles. Here, of course, the issue is with Scholz, with Germany. But again, there's a connection to the Americans there as well. Why is it that the Taurus missile, which flies at extremely low altitudes, necessarily uses the so-called digital terrain map, which at the moment only the Americans have? That's why, without transferring the digital terrain map, this missile will be an easy target at higher altitudes and won't be able to complete its combat mission. So once again, everything depends on the Americans in every respect. So we'll just have to wait for Trump to get up on the wrong side of the bed.
Dear audience, please like this video and leave a few kind words for our duo in the comments. Roman Igorovich and I work together several times a week, definitely more than 3 shows. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, share your location, and leave a few warm words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine. The well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Igorovich, thank you, and as usual, see you again on Wednesday.